Thanks a lot, Matt, and thanks to all of you for coming out today on this beautiful day. I'm sure everybody could be somewhere else, but that you chose to come here says a lot. So I'm just going to talk at you for a few minutes. I want to talk first about what happened here, and then secondly, why we're doing this. First, on the what happened here. Shortly after Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt formally declared war and also wrote an executive order based on the 1789 Alien Enemies Act. This act called for the rounding up of people of Japanese descent and interning them against their will for an indeterminate amount of time for the safety of the United States. The people here at Fort Missoula were mostly men. They were separated, not mostly, they were entirely men. They were separated from their families. Their wives and children went one place, they came here. And when you walk in here, one of the things that struck me the other day was, well, it's not so bad. It looks pretty nice. Yeah, it looks pretty nice. And it was also a prison. For the people that were here, the men that were here, they did not know how long they were going to be here. They did not know if they would ever see their wives and their children again, or if they would ever return to their homes, their businesses, and their farms. They were in prison. Their fate was not their own. While they were here, they had to meet with a panel of judges for a loyalty hearing. The best case result of the loyalty hearing was what they would be deemed worthy enough to rejoin their wives and children in another internment camp. The worst case scenario would be that they would be held by the U.S. government and used as human stakes in a trade for Japanese prisoners later. Now, this was especially bad for these folks because of the essence of their culture at the time. A culture that prized responsibility and conformity and was built upon also shame for not meeting your responsibilities and your obligations. There's an ancient Japanese proverb, the nail that stands out gets hammered in. These folks we're talking about, these men, were new-ish, they could be second generation, so new-ish immigrants to the United States who did their very best to conform to not stand out. They learned to speak English and they excelled. They owned businesses and farms. I keep hitting on farms because a whole large part of this population came from the Pacific Northwest and were fruit and vegetable farmers. These people had excelled as immigrants and made tremendous efforts to conform. And when these men were held here, they internalized this as a failure on their part to meet their responsibilities to conform. They endured personal shame at having lost their homes, their farms, their businesses, and their families for whom care for was their primary obligation. So as you walk inside here and see this really nice place, also know that it is home to the saddest of emotions. We can't measure the sadness, the depression, the shame that was in this space. The energy is bad. So, why not just close this dark chapter? Right? We could just be done with this and move on. Why do we spend this money and all this human effort to create this museum? And when I say dark chapter, please don't think, oh, it's just the 3 liberal county commissioners that would call this a dark chapter. I'm quoting the federal government, our government, when I say we apologize. In 1988, Ronald Reagan passed the Civil Liberties Act, where he formally apologized to Japanese Americans. He said internment, and this is a quote, was based on racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. And he authorized compensation, financial compensation for the survivors. So when I say dark chapter, it's not me and Dave and Juan. I'm quoting Ronald Reagan. But again, why do this? Maybe Ronald Reagan closed the chapter, paid people off. We can be done now. I want to go a little farther back in history to attempt to make my case why we can never be done. Another president wrote, and at the time he wasn't president when he wrote this, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident means we don't have to prove them. It's like gravity. They just are. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All people are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That means the rights cannot be taken from them. They are of us. These inalienable rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these values are transcendent. They went way beyond the person who wrote them. They exist as guideposts for our country. When I think about American exceptionalism, this is what I think about. That we are built on these transcendent values. And those words were written by a man whose economic life was fueled by chattel slavery. His life partner, he held in bondage. And that doesn't lessen those values. In fact, what I'm talking about is not hypocrisy. That's deeply oversimplified. What I'm talking about is the essence of what I would call the American project, which is making those values real in the face of the most base and common of human impulses. The impulse to fear, impulse toward greed and power, and roll those three together, greed, power, fear, and you get mistakes at the deep cost of others, like this. I'm going to quote one more great American. The arc of history is long, but it tends towards justice. Now that arc doesn't just happen on its own. We can't just stand by and expect ourselves to get better. We get better in terms of justice, in terms of making those ideals real in the world, because we work for it. Justice is a practice. You have to do it over and over, and you never really get there. Creating a museum space like this allows others to engage in that practice through their visitation and learning the lessons incorporated here. That's why we do this, to make that practice of justice possible for the next generation of Missoulians, in the hopes that we don't ever do this sort of thing again. And I know, and we all know, we just might. But keeping places like this and these stories alive stacks the odds towards seeing that arc head towards justice. Thank you.